Okay, I see the light.
I just clicked on Facebook.
And then we're live. Give me one of these. And it's time to go.
I shared on his timeline is what I did.
Webinar now streaming live on Facebook. Sorry, we're the gang who can't shoot straight on these tech things while Scott's gone.
Yeah.
So relieved he comes back. Okay, ready to begin, Christopher?
I am.
Okay, terrific. Hello, and welcome to all our note investing friends. You have reached Friday, June 1st. This is the Note Closers podcast. Missing the famous Scott Carson, we're doing our best to fill his big shoes, but what are you going to do? It's just us. Today, our subject is one I personally have been dying to talk about. Chris and I have these conversations pretty regularly. We call them rant sessions, where we talk about problems we've had with vendors, deals, and other people in our world that really affect your quality of life when you're a note investor. So we're just here to tell some ugly stories that hopefully have some golden lessons to be learned in them, though I don't know for sure that that's the case. There's my husband, hi honey. I just had so I think everyone knows from Note Camp, I was teetering on the brink of my first losing deal and having a rather tough time with it emotionally. And I'm now ready to, blame people and talk about exactly what happened. Get my revenge. I bought a house, and before I bought, it was a contract for deed. The house was vacant. I knew it would be an easy cash for keys situation. I had two people look at the house before I bought it. It was a brick house, which in my mind is like, oh my gosh, a brick house. That's like the best. That's the gold standard. What could be wrong with a brick house? And then after I bought it, and a preservation company went in and photographed it top to bottom. And it was on the basis of how great everything looked that I went ahead and started renovating it, thinking I would sell it with owner finance and put a nice new family in there. And my painter, when he was all finished with the inside, goes outside to see if the window frames need painting and discovers what no one had miraculously seen up until then. There was a major structural problem with the house that turned out not to be, you were one of the first people, Chris, who tried to make me feel like you talked me off the ledge. Maybe you just need to tie the bricks back to the frame and it's not a big deal. The bricks were splaying out in a way that made the window look like it was falling backwards into the house. And unfortunately, it didn't turn out to be that simple. But that was one of the first really clearly terrible experiences I had. And of all the people who looked at it, I sort of blame the preservation company the most because they photographed it. And the fact that they didn't, see this was, when I later put the house up for sale, I waited to see if anyone would notice it, and everybody saw it. So, I know you had a problem with the same preservation company. I'm so tempted to name them. Can we name them? I think
we'll keep it. We'll stay from naming them. Did you get a BPO done on the property as well?
I had a realtor go look at it, and he gave me sort of a
drive-by.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah.
Yeah, it's, these stories as you get involved in the industry, I'll say are constant and continuous. And like Gail mentioned, we go back and forth. We joke that we're each other's therapists now in regards to some of these deals we have. But, we get good stories, and then you got some that, honestly, you want to peel your head out, rip your hair out of your head and stuff. One of the things that I'll mention about some of this, these deals and so forth is as you get going and as you start JVing with people, as you start doing marketing and stuff, you'll pick up some JV partners and you'll have some funds available, but you don't want to force the deal. There was early on, I think I kind of forced a deal once where my JV partner really wanted this property because he wanted to take it back. It was a vacant property, and there was just a lot of problems with it. We ended up doing well on the property, but going forward on the next one, the partner was more somebody who was interested in the fixing and flipping of the note versus, or getting it as an REO and selling it versus looking for the cash flow. And that's really not my strategy. So that's one of the components I wanted to push to people out there is when you're meeting with your partners and stuff and talking with them, make sure you're on the same page and you have the same realistic goals, because if they want their money back in 6 or 12 months, and you're looking for the long-term cash flow, or it's a deal that might be longer than that, you just could be upfront with them.
Yeah. Well, we should just go ahead and talk about JVs since there's so much to say. JVs, I've generally had very good experiences. I seem to be really attracting people who very much share my values. But I think values are another issue. I mean, one of the reasons that I'm in this business is because I like the fact that I can make a lot of money actually helping people. I can't really think of too many situations where that's the case. And I very specifically, like you, I look for reperformers, or, I don't want to foreclose on someone who is truly, in a terrible situation. I've had opportunities to buy houses where there are elderly people, and then you read the servicing notes and you find out, okay, this guy's 80, his wife is 82 and diabetic and blind and all these things. Like, I'm not going to buy that, except now I feel like I had that exact situation in Savannah, Georgia. And, I look at a note like that and I think, okay, these people can't afford this house anymore. So, if I buy it, can I make enough ROI to make an investor happy? And I think there are investors out there who might be willing to take a little less and do sort of, impact investing, like they want to make a difference in the world. Mm-hmm. Right now, that isn't really what any of my current investors are looking at. They're very nice people. But I'm upfront. I bought one recently. It has a very high monthly payment. And we know from the tax records that the borrower's on disability. So I just said to the investor, look, let's not buy this if you're not willing to reduce his monthly payment, if that becomes necessary. Because I think even if we reduced it, the ROI is going to be like 36%. So, are you willing to take 36% instead of 42? I mean, I think the answer should be yes, to let a disabled man stay in his house that he's been in for 20 years. And you have to answer that yes to that if you want to be my JV. Yeah,
there's, like you mentioned, there's a moral aspect of it too, of, your goal or your business plan is, if you're looking to keep the borrowers in the home, you really got to reinforce that with your JV partners. And the returns, the returns are the returns. On a lot of my deals, I basically, if I'll say market to my inner circle, I won't publish deals that show, 50, 80%. Like you see some people publish things like that, because the reality of it is I do think those deals are far few in between, and there's always many different exit strategies and things that can go wrong. I've got a property, and I've talked to you about this many times, my property in Ohio that,
with the pool in the basement?
Yeah, it has a pool in the basement, indoor pool. If anyone wants a property in Ohio, give you a great deal on it. The borrower had his car in the driveway, had a light on in the property, and he moved next door because there was water in the property on a BPO. He had no idea, knowing that it wasn't occupied. But when that did occur, one of the things with the JV partners is I'm upfront with them. I'll call them and say, hey, look, this one's messy, this one's ugly, and map out the strategy and just talk to them. And when you have a lot of conversations before you do a deal with a JV partner, I think that goes a long way in understanding them and having that relationship. If you're just literally having a 5-minute conversation with somebody before you're working on a JV deal with them, that can lead to a lot of challenges. And I had a lesson learned on that, where early on, same thing. I had a JV partner who actually I met locally and had a discussion with them. But hindsight being 2020, I probably should have had 3 or 4 discussions on them, because their level of reporting was, let's just say, they wanted a very high level of reporting. The note was actually a semi-performer that we got them on a trial payment plan. They started performing, but they literally were emailing me about once a week asking if we've got a payment. And had to remind them, explain to them that, just like if you have a mortgage, you pay monthly. And, if it's due the 1st, we get a payment on the 3rd or 4th, don't email me on the 20th to see if we've got that other payment. Because
I just have to say, anyone who complains about the level of reporting you do is already, not on our planet, because you do more reporting than anyone I know. I mean, I've talked to numerous investors who've told me they've gone a year without really knowing too much about what's going on with their JV deals. So, and you report every month, right? Pretty much.
Yep. So I report every month. And actually, that's what I'm going to be doing this weekend, is sending out my monthly reports. I actually recently had somebody create a campaign in Infusionsoft that all that information is really in Infusionsoft. So I literally fill in 3 buttons in Infusionsoft, hit the button, and it goes out to my partner. So like anything, try and automate it as much as possible to try and get things going. But
yeah, you're a very high level ninja with all that stuff. I basically finally got my QuickBooks sorted out to the point where I can very easily generate reports that show all the expenses in the reserve fund and what the reserve balance is, and also shows the income. So I just kind of bundle that and send it with a check, and so far so good. Yeah, I was going to say too, like the problem with JVs is they come to you and they're very excited to, they decide to take the leap. They found you, they want, they're ready to go. And I mean, I don't think many JVs themselves know exactly what they want. They just want, they want to be in a deal and they want it to go well, but they're not really clear at the outset what that looks like.
Yeah. And I think part of it too is, as you grow as a note investor, and, I funded my own deals, then had, a family member do some funding. And then when you started to get JV deals, when you get those first few people reaching out to you and stuff, the level of excitement is, like, a kid on his birthday, with the presents. And you just got to be very careful, in your due diligence in regards to, and again, making sure that relationship is a proper relationship, because it's a long-term relationship. It's not something where, hey, look, you hear from this person once or twice. Over the next 12 to 18 months, you're going to be in constant contact with this individual, and you want to make sure that they have the same philosophy, the same morals, the same beliefs that you have.
Yeah, I think you and I, interestingly, when we've compared notes, there have been some JV investors that we've both turned down. I don't really remember what the sort of the trigger words were in the conversations that made us both feel like, no, no.
I've had one who wanted a guaranteed value on the property. So
what is a guaranteed value on a property?
That was
when somebody buys it, and then it's guaranteed.
Well, they basically wanted limits set where, if it was a $20,000 note, they would only put in $5,000, and if we had to rehab the property or anything like that, that would all come out of my pocket. And they wanted basically everything set guaranteed in regards to that. And I basically told them, hey, look, I'm not your person for this. There might be other people out there, but it's, I'm not guaranteeing anything or putting anything, that is unknown at risk. I take that Ohio property. If I would have guaranteed somebody on that property and so forth, it's just not a smart business decision.
Yeah, I've had people who wanted me to pledge that I would put my own money into for rehab and stuff like that. And I think people are JVs are not aware. Like every type of real estate has its sort of, its conventions as far as like how people partner. And I think for some people, it's just, not a lack of awareness that that's not really the way it works in Partner notes.
Hey, quick question. Do you know if we're on Facebook Live? I don't see it.
I see something on mine. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, let me look. I
Okay,
have a phone. Let me look.
okay.
If not, I mean, it wouldn't be my first time.
No worries. I just didn't know if you had any questions while we're just chatting back and forth. While you're looking that up, Gail, we're talking on JVs and so forth. Do you have a minimum value investment now that you have grown to the level that you're at with?
Yeah. I basically go with $50,000. A lot of people who come to me want to, learn this business. And I feel if I'm in a mentoring role with them, there's a lot of value to what we do as mentors with our JVs. So, I'm not in it for someone to spend $12,000 on a contract for deed and learn all my secret sauce and then go. I'm actually really at the point where I don't want to JV with people who are aspiring note investors, because I feel like all I'm really doing is teaching them to invest exactly the way I do, which means, on every future tape, I will be battling with them on, probably the same assets, bidding the same amounts, and they're here and gone. I want long-term JV relationships. I want to, build something with people. So.
Okay.
Yeah. So are you thinking of enacting limitations like that too?
I've started recently. My threshold's a little lower right now. I'm at 25,000 that I have for people, and similar. We can all find contract for deeds at 7, 10, 12,000. Honestly, what I have found is the people that have that lower echelon money, is nothing wrong with it, but that's pretty much all they have. And I don't want to take all of somebody's money is the first component. And secondly, I've had several people who get cold feet. I've had someone basically get cold feet twice on me and on 2 deals that were kind of
You're
low.
not talking about the same person. You mean 2 different people.
Oh, no, same person.
Same person. You gave them a second chance?
I gave them a second chance.
You're
first time shame on
idiot.
you, second time shame on me, I know.
But that's what makes you so lovable.
So I'm not perfect. So my wife tells me that every day. But one thing, Gail, too, with the JV that I just wanted to throw out there, because we've had this discussion, and I'm not sure really most people have really talked about it all, is the termination agreement on a JV deal at the end of a deal. Oh.
Hey, Gail.
Gail Villanueva. Hey, Gail.
Wrong place. Bye.
Oh my gosh, photo bomb.
Yeah, guess. But a lot of people always talk about the JV agreement and getting that and having your attorney review that and so forth. And then we kind of had the conversation once of the a few months ago, or maybe even longer, of okay, what do we do at the end of a deal? And actually, have worked on, and we both have now a JV termination agreement that is just some kind of a quick nugget to people out there watching is, as you take, JVs and you work on your joint venture agreement, also make sure that you have a termination agreement, basically when you cut them that final check, that, the JV is now, closed out, because the last thing you want is 6 months or a year down the road, someone coming back and saying, hey, where's that extra $3,000 you owe me?
Oh God. Yes, that's true. I never really thought about that. So I want to talk about some really bad deals that, I'm lucky that I didn't get into them, but they're definitely.
I don't have any. No.
I was looking at, a tape recently that, you know what? I don't see us live on Facebook. Like, what?
Okay.
Oh, well, never mind.
Yeah, we'll figure it out later.
Just been nothing but technical glitches.
Mm-hmm.
So, I was looking at a really nice tape of CFDs, so many great looking assets, and I know you've bought a lot from that tape too.
Mm-hmm.
I have 3 or 4. It kind of makes me realize why these are still available. So there is one that I'll mention the towns, because people who were disappointed that they didn't get them, this will make you feel a lot better. So there's one in Redford, Michigan, where there was a deed in lieu like 3 buyers ago. And when they did the deed in lieu, they did not give the borrower, or they did not record a satisfaction of mortgage. So basically this house, which is probably worth $50,000, still technically has a mortgage on it of like $110,000.
Mm-hmm.
And it just keeps, I don't think, the lender in that case is the one that gave the deed in lieu to the borrower and then sold, quitclaim deed the property. So I don't, technically they're never going to come for the money. They're not expecting the money. But the problem is, if you ever have a contract for deed borrower in that house who reaches the end of the contract and is now owed the house, you wouldn't be able to give them title to it, clear title, because it's still got this massive loan on it. So that's been a huge problem. And, we kind of went back and forth. Mostly I find that sellers don't like to clean up any of their messes. They just really want you to pay them the money and just take the thing away from them. I have multiple ones that I've bid on that have massive, massive liens on them because of communities like St. Louis, like Lake County, Indiana, where Gary is, and the city of Richmond is. Like, city of Richmond will slap a lien on any property, like say it's Harbor owned. They'll lien every property that Harbor owns in Lake County or the city of Richmond. Like, I was trying to buy something in Gary, Indiana, which, I do with great trepidation anyway. And then
I was gonna say why. Actually, I have 3 notes in Gary. I bought them as all performers though, and I had 2-year performing history, and actually they've been doing very well. But so
as I always say, there are humble abodes and there are humble abodes with gunfire. And I don't buy one type. So like $20,000 in liens. And I just had the same thing. There's a sewer lien, this great property in St. Louis. And I'm not dying to buy something in St. Louis, but it was a nice property. The return was really good. Someone looked at it for me, a contractor. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I don't really have realtors look at properties anymore. I send Craigslist people for $20 and ideally contractor/handymen if possible, because I feel like they really notice what's going on. You have a hard time restraining them though. I had one that actually put a ladder up against a house and was going to go up and look at the roof.
I just got a email from somebody who was a JV partner now out buying their own notes. And, I do the same thing. I send Craigslist people out because they're much more, they're very brave. And he mentioned that he'd send me a thing. He goes, oh boy, he goes, the person drove into the driveway, got out of the car, started walking around the property. And he goes, even though you tell them like, don't talk to the person, just take a few shots from the street. If it's vacant, then do what you need to do. I've had actually pizza delivered before to a house.
You want to see if anyone was there?
If anyone was there, but also try and get a little bit of a look on the inside as well. But now, Gail, you mentioned about a lot of the liens and things of that nature. Do you find that more often with notes or with contract for deeds or with both?
Yeah, really contracts for deed. It's these properties that keep getting sold with quitclaim deeds over and over again, and nothing ever gets dealt with. It's like the buck stops with you if you buy it. I mean, you could, I guess, as an investor, take the view like, okay, I will buy it and I'll do exactly what the seller's doing to me. I will eventually resell it and I won't deal with any of these things. Mm-hmm. But I don't know if I'm just being overly, are there buyers who buy these with $20,000 liens? Just figure,
It's a good question.
I'll squeeze it for the juice that I'm going to get, and then I'll just, send it on.
So, my first CFD that I went to go buy, and, sometimes the best note is the ones you don't buy. And, this CFD actually, the Zillow pictures, the house was a mess. I had a note in the area that I had, and I had a local handyman who was taking care of the lawn and everything for me. So he went by and took some pictures for me, and he said, wow, they put new windows in, place has been updated, looks really, really good. But when I went to go look into, the collateral component of it, first was I tried to get title insurance on it, which was basically a waste of $300 because trying to get title insurance on a CFD is pretty much impossible. But what ended up happening is the land contracts, how they were getting assigned, the land contract was executed before the deed was recorded. So when I heard from the attorney, basically it's an invalid land contract. And then the person who had the land contract assigned it to another person who he assigned it to. So it was just, a big circle of mess, and the property actually, had a lot of value to it. And it was one of those things where it's like, do you take the risk? But there's so many issues with it. And at the end of the day, basically, I probably had about $700 into the deal because of the due diligence, the attorney review, the title report, full title report I pulled and everything. And I just pulled the plug on it.
Well, what I find difficult too is that different attorneys give you different opinions about things that should be, black and white. Like, you're an attorney. There are laws guiding these things. So why are we disagreeing? So our friend Tanya, who just bought her first 2 notes.
Congratulations, Tanya.
Yay, Tanya. Good going. Hope you funded today. If not, do not speak to John Keith again. He will not take your calls. So she just told me, I own several contracts for deed in Birmingham. She just told me that to take a contract for deed house back in Birmingham, you have to have all your land contract assignments recorded. And I've now checked with 2 other attorneys, and they both said they're not aware that that's the case. So, what do you do about these things? It's often, you're often in a sales situation where you don't have like months to find out whether you're going to buy something or not. And you get all these conflicting opinions. I don't know. It's just very, very baffling. I feel like I've definitely missed out on deals because I was overly cautious. But on the other hand, you have to be cautious, right?
Yep. And, it's kind of like the Maryland debt collectors. I can, talk for hours on that whole issue with the license requirements in Maryland based on the many conversations I've had with Brian, my attorney on that, who which I'm not going to get Brian Gallagher.
People that were not, that we didn't give up on.
Yeah. So he's, Brian has, as you used him, well experienced and stuff, and I rely on him. And that's really what I have to do is I rely on my attorney. I may get a second opinion on it, but at the end of the day, I rely on their judgment. And if something happens during that phase of it, I'm going to look back to them for their experience. And,
It's interesting that you were talking about that land contract being a problem because it was signed before the property transferred. So essentially, somebody who didn't own the property was selling it on a land contract.
They actually, they closed on the deal. It's like, say you're closing on a note deal today, and you had somebody under a land contract on Monday, but you didn't record that deed. And both were recorded. Both actually did get recorded. So if you were, John Smith was a land contract that you recorded in Lake County, and then you record the deed 2 weeks later, basically it's an invalid land contract. And in certain states, and I can't recall which ones, but, some states that person may be able to, any funds they've paid, get it back, even if they aren't performing, or if they're not performing, it can just lead to a lot of problems. And it's where
I know there are many places where, if the land contract is deemed invalid in court, technically you could be required as lender to pay back everything that has ever been paid on that land contract, even paid to previous lenders before you had it.
Yep.
Which sounds horrible, but then there's usually kind of this mitigating factor where the court will then say, but you are also allowed to collect rent, you know, like market rent for that same period where the land contract wasn't in place, because the general idea is the person doesn't get to live there for free, like just because there's a paperwork snafu. So it kind of evens out. Have you been told that?
I have. You know, I've been told that, and it's one of those things where I just look at it from, I'm just not going to take the risk. I'm not gonna
I know. It just sounds like a huge hassle
yeah,
to battle about it. And if, heaven forbid, you have one of those wily borrowers who really knows the laws and the system and how to get the maximum amount of time and squeeze the maximum amount of legal cost out of you, they can just win the war of attrition. You know, you just can't hang in there long enough to win, even if you're right. But you know, you're talking about an invalid thing. I have that right now. So any of you who were bidding on an asset on a street called Liberty Valley in Decatur, Georgia, this is what you missed out on. That property, there was a deed in lieu 3 buyers ago, and since that time it has transferred 3 times on a quitclaim deed. But that original deed in lieu borrower is still listed as the owner of the property. And why is that? Those 3 transfers by quitclaim deed, in the legal description, the lot number is incorrect. It should be 16 and they have 18. Now this seems like the smallest thing in the world, but because that happened, it took a tremendous amount of phone calling and digging to even find out why all those deed transfers were listed in the public record as invalid sales. And, you know, nobody even knew why that was. Like the seller couldn't explain. I'm not sure they even bothered asking or looking, but I'm doggedly determined, and I started my life as a reporter, so I always like to find out exactly what's going on. So basically, all 3 of those sales have been considered invalid, and the deed has been called unworkable. And so what that actually means is that the seller who is endeavoring to sell that property to me doesn't even own it, technically. So I'm right now trying to get them, like, it turns out that although this is the smallest issue in the world, 1 digit in 3 deeds, and the GIS person at the county told me, at DeKalb County, said, you know, all you have to do is file an affidavit correcting it. But it turns out, in talking to 2 different attorneys, that that isn't all you have to do. And the only thing that will resolve this is a quiet title action, which will cost either $5,000 on the low end or $15,000.
And if I recall that CFD, because I think I bid on it.
Yes, of course you did. We all did.
Yeah, a bid price. I think that it was in high single digits. I think possible. That
wasn't the price that they.
Okay, came back up.
The balance or
no, the sales price.
Oh yeah, no, it wasn't that. No, they went $13,000. Okay. The house is potentially worth like 60.
But you got $5,000 to put into it, and you know that from a legal perspective, that could be 15. That just, you know, like you said, added up. I've had similar with, I'll say, deals and borrowers in regards to, one of the things lessons learned is if there's a long history of foreclosure on the property and it extended for a year and then gets dismissed or extended.
Wait, I know, it's cursed. It's on sacred Indian burial ground.
Yeah. Or the person really likes to fight, and that's a sign that they like to fight, and they're going to fight you as well. So the $3,000-$4,000 that you thought you were going to spend turns into $7,000, $8,000, or $9,000.
Such a good story for you about that.
One of the first notes I bought was it's been since November of 2017, and this note is still active. That it had a UPB of probably like 10 grand, and the house was worth like 45. And, I didn't listen to Scott, and I bought one with equity. It was non-performing. But this borrower has just fought the foreclosure. They send a letter every month basically saying that the servicer isn't following RESPA and Truth in Lending by answering questions or providing information. We've had several foreclosure dates that have been postponed. I'm not going to name the state or a city or anything like that because it's still active, but it's slowly coming to fruition. Yeah. But it's one of those where, like I said, the UPB was like 10. I think I paid around 3 for it. And, my legal costs have probably been double what I actually paid on it. But unfortunately, you can tack them on. But I look back and they probably spent about the same amount just fighting this thing. And, we tried to reach out to them and, just work out a short payoff and stuff. And they wouldn't bite. They wanted to fight. And, I've had, many deals since then that have come and gone. And this is kind of one that just constantly lingers.
It stays as a reminder of how impetuous you were as a young man in notes.
Yeah.
So I had a similar situation. I actually didn't buy this one, but Condor, a year ago, was trying to sell this very nice 3-bedroom house in Philadelphia, right near St. Joe's, which is a big, college. That's actually not too far from me. And it was, in walking distance of the campus, 3 bedrooms. It would have cash flowed like crazy. And they told me when they were discussing it with me that it was actually an REO at this point. They had been through this long and totally exhausting process. And, crazily, they say to me, you would not believe how much it cost us to foreclose on this. And, apparently because the borrower, just fought them tooth and nail. So I look up the borrower, and it turns out he's an attorney, which means that, he can fight all day long, But their whole point was like, it's all done. All you have to do is eject the guy, do an ejectment procedure, which in Philadelphia, it can be as expensive and long as the foreclosure itself. And I mean, they basically told me they spent like upwards of $80,000 for closing on this guy because he just, he had the tools and ability. They were paying real lawyers. He was defending himself. And I spoke to an attorney about what the ejectment could conceivably cost. Like worst case scenario, someone fights. And they were like $50,000. Oh my God.
Note to self.
Even count him, at the end having lost his 8-year battle, what he would do to the house on the way out. So.
Note to self. That's why you always check who the borrower is. And I've had multiple of that were attorneys, and I'm just like, I'm not going to deal with an attorney on the other end. Adam Adams had a bunch that were deceased borrowers. I know early on I've had a bunch like that, and those actually have been decent deals for me in the sense, and partly because at some point in time they were actually listed for sale. So I had some recent interior photos on the properties, or there were family members that wanted to work with you when you read the servicing notes. But that's a good point you bring up about we're in this industry. You are looking at the property and you're focused on the property and what the value of the property is. But there is that, that soft skills side of doing that, Facebook stalking and, whether it's Spokio or white pages to really find out a little bit about that borrower. And then once you get the servicing comments, if you get it under agreement, you definitely want to check what those are to see if the person's hostile or not, because you're going to know if the person's going to fight. And if the person's going to fight, it's, your legal bills run up very, very quickly.
Yeah. Do you, have you been successful getting servicing notes on contracts for deed?
Yes. So I've asked that last group of the ones I recently closed on, I asked John, to get the servicing comments on them. And, he sent them over. I also did ask for current payoffs right before closing, because as we've discussed, I've had an issue in the past where, the due diligence period, call today June 1st. I may have had a note under agreement on May 1st, and, the due diligence and there were some issues and so forth. So we might not have closed until today. Well, in that time on one of those notes, the borrower made it was actually at the time 5 notes, and one of the borrowers made a large payment. I think it was because they got tax money back. And then 4 of the other notes also made some pretty decent payments. And, if it was short money, I wouldn't really, bring it up or just have discussion, but it was to the tune of over, I think it was well over $3,000. I think it might have been even closer to 5. And actually it was where I did have the closing date was actually earlier and the payments had come after. And then I ended up having to get legal involved in this issue with your favorite servicer. Again, we won't name names. You've got your favorite there. I've got 2 favorites. But I had to get the legal involved because, hey, I had a contract that says any payments after X date, come to me. And, they were fighting that. So I've learned now if the closing date is the date I am basically funding, which 99% of the times it is, and it's been a while, I will ask for most up-to-date payoff the day before closing. Similar like when you're closing on a house in some senses, which we're doing on a CFD. Hey, what were the taxes? What were everything else? Which actually just popped in my head, leads me to a note I have going on that kind of these horror story notes. So I have a note in Virginia that was actually on the market for sale, the property, first position lien, basically picked it up for about 35% of what the asking price was for sale. So basically the prior lender had agreed to a short sale, no bites because the agent who listed it, I believe is a friend of the borrower. So they just, I think it's a rental. It's actually got multiple units where they're, I think, just collecting the paychecks and listing it for sale, but never answering phone calls.
Right.
So basically it agreed to a deed in lieu back in April with them. So went through the process, had the attorney draft it up. It takes a few days, week to do that. You mail it out. They hold it for 2 to 3 weeks. I bought the note back in December, January. So they signed the deed in lieu. And before, I went to go record things, I'm like, let me just pull another, O&E report from ProTitle, from the last time to now, just to make sure. And, $50 well spent because previously they had a property manager on the property that slapped a $12,000 lien on the property in between that time. So if I would have signed the deed in lieu, I would have a property with a $12,000 lien on it.
Yikes.
Which, the property's worth about, $30,000. So just think of, having that lien on it, basically that would have wiped out, anything I would have ever made on the deal. So I actually called the property management company and basically they noted they had an offer from the borrower allegedly for $8,000. And I said, well, I'm not giving you $8,000 in Virginia to foreclose. It's a few $1,000 and it'll be done in 45, 60 days. So I said, I'll give you, the cost. Basically, it's going to cost me to foreclose so I can get this resolved. And they flat out rejected it. So we're now in the foreclosure process stage. And, I'm guessing that probably once they get the notice, they're probably going to call me and see if, try and work something out. But if I've already expended that money with the attorney, I'm going to basically say, it's just easier for me to foreclose at this point in time because I already spent it. Why am I going to give up any more? I have no problem waiting the extra 30, 60 days. Because I was also negotiating with one of the tenants in the property to sell it to them at a basically as write a note for them and basically have the note be what their rental payment was, so they actually would have ownership on it. But I've been trying to work that aspect of it, but the borrower really, I don't think, wants to own it. They want the flexibility, but. Yeah, so as we talk about notes from hell and stuff, that was one where just a little tidbit for people. If you're taking deed in lieu and stuff and it's been, a few months, spend the extra $35, $50, whatever ProTitle charges for an updated O&E report because you never know.
Yeah, really. It makes me sad actually when you put all that effort into trying to work things out with people and then they're just completely unrealistic. I have my only note in Pennsylvania near me is in an area like a big rental area outside of Philly called Norristown, and there is a guy. It's a rental property and it's in really terrible shape. In fact, when I was buying the note from Automation Finance, is that what they?
Paul Briquette?
Yeah.
Automation Solutions. Is Automation Solutions or Automation Finance?
I don't know. I think I just don't know.
Paul Briquette.
Wherever they are. I haven't seen anything from
Yeah, I
them
was gonna say, I haven't seen
in a long time. I don't know if they're even still out there, but I sent them a photograph of the property is condemned notice that was on the property. Get a little extra discount on it, but after chasing the borrower who hasn't made a single payment in 6 years, I knew it was a foreclosure situation, and this guy has declared bankruptcy 5 times in 6 years in order to not pay the taxes and get away with all kinds of stuff. He bought a whole bunch of properties in that area, rental properties, right before the crash. So he's just kind of buried in all these problems, just sort of trying to crawl out from underneath all of it. And for some reason, he likes this property and wants to keep it. And so on this property is owed $13,000 in back taxes. There's code enforcement fines of $3,000 or $4,000. There are other things that are on it as liens. And then, he owes me $60,000. His reinstatement is 20 something because he hasn't made a payment in 6 years. So, after, we're putting up the notices, the demand letters, and the notice of foreclosure, he calls me and he tells me all these things. He sounds like an elderly dude. I mean, I find quite often people turn out to be a lot younger than they sound on the phone. But, we were send a proposal for how you're going to turn this whole situation around. So he literally sends me a text that says, I, so-and-so, will do such and such. I will rent out this property for $900 a month. I have $6,000 to, get it going again. I own 9 other properties. I'm selling 2 of them on short sales. And I thought, okay, so first of all, he thinks that a proposal means swearing an oath of some kind. I promise I will pay you the $6,000 he's got to get this going. It needs a minimum of 12 to renovate it to be rent ready. Best case scenario, if you find a really reasonable contractor. And, and he doesn't I will pay the taxes. It's he doesn't have any money. The $900, if he even gets to that point, is not going to cover what he owes me plus current taxes plus his payment on his delinquent taxes, which a $13,000 balance is going to be a huge payment. So, he just keeps calling me and saying well, what do you think? What do you think? And I'm that's not a proposal. I mean, that's a statement of intention. That will work with your personal development coach, but that's not really something that we work with.
Let me ask you this, if this is a proposal, because just popped in my head, our good friend Andy at Polaris, who I know you use, I had a note, let's just say in a location where they have water issues, and actually
you have a water sign as your
actually got the foreclosure date today on this property, but I thought this one was actually going to be, every deal you think's a slam dunk is the ones that go completely, turn over sideways, and the ones that you think are going to be difficult actually turn out to be, that was easy. But so this one had a borrower who had it as a rental and had it with 9 others that they own. And this one was actually listed for rent. And I had somebody reach out to just see if it was still available. And it's nope, we just rented that one, but got another one somewhere else. And they were getting $400 a month for it. So I had Andy call and basically say, hey, look, let's offer him, $275 a month or whatever it was, because I literally basically paid almost nothing for this at the time. And basically the first phone conversation once got her on the phone was basically told her, she told him the shortening of fire truck, and then told him where to go, and said, never call me again, and basically hung up on him. And, we tried to reach out to this person and be like, look, you're getting paid for this. We'll let you cash flow. Let's make it a win-win deal.
Right.
And the person was just completely adamant, like, nope, want nothing to do with you. Don't want, anything to do with it. And lo and behold, come to find out, during the downturn, basically she had, a lot of these houses were with a fund that she owned them and was a lender. And basically they wiped the debt on a bunch of them. They just, because the properties, some of them were worth so little, basically just said, you know what, we're just going to, write it off. And basically I think they 1099'd her. But so on this one, again, I thought this one would be a nice, simple one where, okay, you got a renter, let's just, give me some payments, but let you cash flow. And unfortunately, this one's been a very, very challenging struggle in regards to getting any payments in. So now got a foreclosure coming up in the next 60 days. We'll see what happens. Which I had a question for you too, in regards to some of these. Have you ever gone after a deficiency judgment on any of your borrowers?
I haven't, like nobody that I've ever, well, first I actually never foreclosed on anyone yet, all the way.
Okay.
Yeah. How many have you done?
Foreclose on 4 or 5 that full gone through. I've got one right now that will be, I think, number 6, which is in Wyoming. This one was, I have done everything possible to not foreclose on this person. It's a small town in Wyoming that was kind of a throw-in on a small pool I bought. And I have an agent in the area who's knocking on the door, knows a family member who works at a local diner, trying to be like, will you please just pick up the phone and call somebody? And they refuse to. We must have sent 20 letters, had 5 door knockers. The attorney, the agent's gone to the house and stuff, and basically kind of left me no option but to foreclose. And now, there's a 90-day, basically take back period that they have, because there was also a second on the property that they have that now we're just waiting through that process. But I'm still actually trying to reach out to them to work it out. But I've never done a deficiency judgment, and I was just curious if, you had ever done any.
Yeah, I certainly know people who have. There's someone well known to both of us who, it's kind of a part of his personal style. He loves to do the detective work to find out what else they own and to go, slap a deficiency judgment on. Yeah. Most of the borrowers that I have are so, they don't own multiple properties. Like this one in PA would be the first one. Mm-hmm. But, every one of his properties is in trouble. They're all going to go for less. I mean, probably all the lenders, they're not like me. They're going to foreclose, but they're not going to keep the property. They're definitely going to sell it for whatever they can get for it. And
yeah, in my foreclosures, through my notes that I've done, most of the ones have been where the borrower was deceased. So it's kind of going in, I knew. This one in Wyoming, this other one I talked about earlier, that's been going on forever. Those are really I can think of the only 2 where the borrowers haven't been able to, get a workout, involved with them. And really the reason has been communication, that they, I can't get anybody on their end to respond, pick up a phone call and call, because we've, reached out and said, hey, let's try and work something out. And, unfortunately nobody has. And
yeah. Do you think the problem is really that they've been undisturbed by previous lenders for so long that they just really don't think anything's going to happen?
I think there's 2 scenarios that I've seen. One is the borrower has an attorney that is not looking out in their best interests. I think I've talked to you about this one I have with the bankruptcies, where the person filed bankruptcy, got dismissed. Their attorney, basically charged them $4,500, and they just refiled bankruptcy again a week after the first one got dismissed, and they paid their attorney $4,000 or $5,000 to refile this bankruptcy, and it's been since 2 months now, haven't made a payment, and the trustee is now basically 3 weeks ago filed a motion to dismiss. And I feel for this borrower, because we were trying to work something out with them, and their attorney has been kind of intervened and really not looking out their best interest, because the property actually has equity in it. The borrower, unfortunately, can't afford the property. And the best avenue would be, we wanted to work with him, say, hey, we'll work with you, find an agent to try and list a property to sell it so you can get top value, because if we have to foreclose on the property, then you're not going to get top value for it. And, unfortunately, the borrower doesn't have an income, so it's not like I can work any modification out with him in that sense. And, he could take the cash that he gets from the sale, which would be significant, and then roll that into a new thing and, do whatever he needs to do. But so attorneys, I think, are one. And then, the other is what you mentioned, where people have, dangled that carrot of threatening to foreclose. Nobody's ever done it. And they're just like, okay, I'm just not going to have to pay, because they're probably just, going down the same path. And when I was talking to, I forget who I was talking to, it may have been an attorney or somebody, basically about the fact that, and there's a lot of note investors out there too, who won't go down that path of foreclosing. There's certain hedge funds that won't foreclose, so that's why they sell them. But, at some point in time, I don't like to foreclose. It's not my primary strategy. I definitely want to work something out. But there comes a point in time where if the person basically just doesn't step up to the plate, then you got to do something.
No, do you ever feel like we're just like the cleanup crew? Like, just like pushing the little trash can along and sweeping.
But, on the flip side, we talked about some of the deals that gone wrong or, not well. But I had one that borrower, I think we were talking about this yesterday, basically wouldn't respond to anybody, to door knocker, sent the notice of intent to foreclose, basically had $15,000 to get caught up, and cut me a check for $15,000. Now they're all caught up. That one's nice. It's, I think, so that one I truly believe was, they were just thinking that it's, basically, I'll call it a threat that is never going to come to fruition.
Yeah. Yes. And you're such a nice guy. Who would think you would actually do it?
Again, everybody gets in trouble at some point in their life, no matter whether it's financially or whatever it is. We all have, nobody's life is perfect. And if it is, then you should be writing books and be, very famous. So we all have, hardships in our life, and, we've all been through them. So when you're dealing with some of these borrowers, sometimes think of your hardship that you went through and think of how stressful that is. So certain things you got to realize is, when you're foreclosing, I had a foreclosure recently that the borrower had lived in the property for 15 years. And, I basically was like, I'm not going to sit there and file the eviction notice the day after I had the deed signed. I found a real estate agent that reached out to them. We got on the phone with them and said, okay, how can we help you to make this transition as smooth as possible? I can't let you stay in for a year, but if you need a place, till the end of the month or for 2 months. And, from my perspective, if I'm going to list a house for sale, I actually, depending on where it's located, would rather have somebody living in the house than have a vacant property. Because if it's vacant, depending on where it is, you got crime, things could happen to it. Whereas I work out a deal with them where, hey, I'll let you stay for 30, 60 days. And instead of giving them cash for keys to leave, hey, I'll give you 60 days to stay in the property without paying me, or give me $100 or, whatever it is. Or then I'll cut you a check if you leave after 100 days for $100. So you're not losing anything, because you got the property as an REO, but it's not generating any income. So you're helping somebody out while you're also helping yourself out, because your insurance costs are a little lower because it's still occupied, and you're less risk to have it be vandalized.
Exactly. Except by the owners themselves.
Yeah.
I'm afraid that's it for us, Chris. I feel bad for everyone who only has an hour with you, where I get your drive time almost every day.
So,
Which I love.
But it's been a pleasure, as always, Gail, and always good chatting with you. And every time I talk with you, of course, I learn something new as well. Why don't you tell people how they can reach out to you, and if they look in the chat or get more information or look at some opportunities you have.
Okay, great. Yes, you can find me at gail@winwinnotes.com. My cell phone number is, I think, going to remain a secret at this point. I've been talking to a lot of people, you and I and everyone else on the podcast, I'm sure is hearing from a lot of people. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions or have any interest in doing any work together, and we're always available.
And if you're looking to reach out to me, it's Chris, CHRIS, @7E investments.com, or visit me on the web at www.7einvestments.com, and my contact information and phone number are all available to you. So,
Awesome.
Well, Gail, it's been a pleasure as always. Have a good weekend, and I'm sure we will keep in touch. And for everybody out there, thank you for watching, and have a good day.
Yeah, call me at 5.
Yeah.